Old school FBI load, 38 Special+P. So what we got going on here is a 158 grain lead semi-wad cutter hollow point. So I did a test like this in the past with a couple different bullet styles, with the Zero brand bullet and with the Hornady brand bullet. And I didn't get very good performance with those bullets, even though I had a lot of power. I was in 9mm territory for energy, but the bullets just wouldn't expand. And a lot of people said, hey, you need to use the Speer lead semi-wad cutter hollow point because that one will perform. So one of my Patreon supporters happened to have a bunch of these, and he sent a bunch of these Speer 158 grain lead semi-wad cutter hollow points over to the channel for testing. So I loaded them up the way I loaded the other ones up, and that is with 6 grains of Alliant power pistol powder. So these are almost exactly to load data, except it calls for a CCI 500 primer. I'm using a CCI 550 Magnum primer, but essentially, you know, we're right to load data. 6 grains of power pistol, 1.455 overall length, and I'm going to use my 4-inch barrel Smith & Wesson 686 and my 2-inch barrel Taurus 605 to do this test, and we'll see if these will do better with that 6 grains of power pistol than the other bullet styles did. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go into plain clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. No denim in the way to potentially clog those hollow points, to see if we actually can get some, you know, hollow point expansion with its best possible potential. You know, the best test I can do where it's going to give the best chance for success, and that's plain clear ballistics. Then I'll move on to doing a real world simulation. 4 layers of denim on this first 3-inch piece that represents our pectoral muscle. After that, followed by a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum. 16 more inches of clear ballistics and another 1/4-inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh, so 3 inches and 16 inches is more like 1.5 inches and 8 inches and an actual living target. So we're really trying to simulate a 9.5-inch thick individual with ribs with our real world simulation. So we'll do our plain clear ballistics shot with both barrel lengths, then our real world simulation shot with both barrel lengths, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, let's see what we get with these loads going through the 4-inch barrel. 158 grain lead semi-wad cutter hollow point, 6 grains of power pistol. .966, 1015. That looked like it was keyholing a little bit. 958, 1059, 1005, 1008. So those are definitely not coming out perfectly straight, because there should not be a hole that big through the target unless it was going through sideways a little bit. So that's a little bit concerning. Same load, 2-inch barrel. Let's see what this does. .885, 968, 887, 870, 915. So interesting there. You know, they didn't want to rotate perfectly well in the snub for some reason. I don't know what the reason was for that, but interesting. I didn't really notice any keyholing looking things going on with this, but in the 4-inch barrel it kind of looked like they were, which is kind of interesting. So let's hit our ballistics gel block and see how these things will do. All right, first up we'll do our plain clear ballistics shot, our best potential shot. Best potential to get hollow point expansion because there's no denim in the way to clog a hollow point. Best potential to get good penetration because there's no rib simulation in there to slow down its potential for penetration. So let's see what we get with this FBI load through the 4-inch barrel. All right, let's hit that with our 2-inch barrel. Let's go take a look. All right, not terrible performance overall. It looks like we have some mediocre expansion going on, which is pretty good to see. And being that, you know, we have a little bit less penetration with our 4-inch barrel would indicate it probably expanded a little bit more. But it looks like both of these, at least from the angles I'm looking at, it looks like they have mediocre expansion. I would guess somewhere in the mid 40s to low 50 caliber range. It does look like, though, honestly, like there's more damage from that 2-inch barrel, which is interesting. So our energy dump, which just simply means, you know, how much energy is put into this first piece here through expansion and whatnot. Not a great amount with either of them, and not really a big difference. Maybe a little bit more with their 4-inch barrel. But overall, not too bad performance compared to what I see with a lot of loads I test, because sometimes these type of loads will go clear into the middle of this block, which would mean that they're not expanding at all. So at least we got some expansion going on that slows these down. So our 4-inch barrel, pretty consistent damage path there. And we stopped right at 13.5 inches of penetration. I know camera parallax will make that look like it's going up a little bit further than what it actually is. But yeah, 13.5 inches of penetration. Now our 2-inch barrel, we are right at about 15.5 inches of penetration. So a couple inches more with our 2-inch barrel. So honestly, not bad performance overall for what they are. So let's put on our denim, put in our rib simulations, and see how these compare from the different barrel lengths in our real world simulation. All right, our real world simulation, 4 layers of denim followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and then another 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard at the back of that 16 inches to represent hitting back ribs. So let's see what we get with our 4-inch barrel with our real world simulation. All right, let me set that back up and we'll hit it with the 2-inch barrel now. All right, real world simulation 2-inch barrel. Let's see how this compares. Let's go take a look. All right, so yeah, that 2-inch barrel made a difference there in the type of performance we're getting. So it looks like, you know, both of these look like they perform fine when, you know, you're going into playing clear ballistics, but when you're doing a more real world simulation, that 2-inch barrel is just a little bit different. And we can definitely see here what we were not seeing in playing clear ballistics, that velocity from the 4-inch barrel is enough that it is expanding here right away. Even though it doesn't really look like it is from the energy dump, it definitely is. And we can see, obviously, by looking at the one through our 2-inch barrel, that velocity is just not quite enough to get expansion right away. So that's going to enter and not be expanded with the 2-inch barrel. So with the 2-inch barrel, it hit our back rib simulation. And basically, I don't know where that bullet is, to be honest. Oh, it fell down here. A little bit of expansion on that, honestly. So not bad to see that expansion, though. But it looks like it probably expanded slower through the target, and that's why we see it like that. Because that hole going through the first MDF would, you know, not suggest that it was expanded right away, because that's obvious. You know, that hole is smaller than that bullet, and that could not fit through that and do that so it expanded a little bit slower, but our 4-inch barrel expanded right away. So really good performance with our 4-inch barrel, and we stopped right at about 14.75 inches of penetration. So that's a really good penetration overall with both of those. The 4-inch barrel, we had good enough penetration and not over penetration. Now our 2-inch barrel, it's kind of interesting. It stops right here about 19.5 inches of penetration, and that's after basically cracking through the back rib simulation. So, well, that's not like true over penetration in my mind. It is going kind of deep, you know. But yeah, that would pretty much stop inside an attacker and probably not pass through, but it's going to go real deep. Some people might actually think that's a better thing. For me, I would prefer to see something like this, just because you're putting more energy into the target with, you know, less penetration, because you're probably expanded larger. So I personally look at the 4-inch barrel as a complete success. Everything looks really good with the 4-inch barrel. With the 2-inch barrel, you could do better than this. That being said, that's not terrible performance with the 2-inch barrel for a 38 special, I should say. So not bad overall. So let's pull these out of the block. I'll take a close-up look at them. Then I'll shoot our steel, see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel, our 4-inch barrel and our 2-inch barrel. So they had some pretty good expansion with both of these. You know, there's a chipped off piece of that bullet. Don't know why, but it had some really good expansion overall. Looks pretty good. Now when we look at our 2-inch barrel, the expansion's a little bit different here. It kind of expanded one side. This could actually indicate a little bit of tumbling, but not really sure. But they did expand out, and it expanded out, but it looks like, you know, pieces of that bullet were busted off from our 2-inch barrel. And it just wasn't quite as consistent as what it was through the 4-inch barrel. But both of them expanded quite well, which would mean that's a pretty soft lead. Now going through our real world simulation, this is where things change up quite a bit. Our 4-inch barrel, which looks fantastic, and our 2-inch barrel, which doesn't look bad, but our 4-inch barrel, it looks like the expansion threshold was lowered just a little bit by that denim, which made it mushroom pretty much perfectly. And that's what I really like to see, because I trust my real world simulation better than playing clear ballistic shots. That's why I do it. And our 2-inch barrel, kind of some mediocre expansion going on there. So our real world simulation shows a big difference there with barrel length. So this is around 1,000 feet per second. This is about 100 feet per second less. So we can kind of see, you know, where that threshold is for that bullet. And it looks like about 1,000 feet per second is where it's at. So if you loaded the standard pressure version of this, even if it was coming out of a 4-inch barrel, you're probably not going to get better than this. As where when you're doing a really warm +P, you're hitting that 1,000 feet per second. Looks like it does pretty good the way, you know, that bullet was kind of designed to be. So overall here, 2-inch barrel, 4-inch barrel. Our 4-inch is just a little bit more consistent overall than our 2-inch barrel, but overall it's not that bad a performance from both barrel lengths. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, so I just want to see what kind of practical shootability I can get with these. You know, just get a front sight picture, try to hit the target center mass as fast as I possibly can. So let's see what I can do with our 4-inch barrel. Definitely pretty smoky. That's a normal thing with lead bullets. But I would say pretty consistent. It's weird because there's a good amount of muzzle rise, but there's not a lot of recoil at the same time. You know, there's not a lot going back in your hand, but the muzzle does jump quite a bit because it is a relatively powerful load with a very heavy bullet. So let's see what I can do with our 2-inch barrel here. All right, that last one I missed it because for whatever reason something was dragging and the trigger didn't pull through all the way until it was like, you know, all the way at the end of that trigger press, and all of a sudden nothing would happen, and I pulled it harder, which would jerk that shot down off the target. So I've noticed that when I was chronographing these too, that in this particular revolver, for whatever reason, they just want to hang up a little bit. So let me paint that up. I'm going to back it up and shoot from. I'm going to do 40 yards and see how they do from there, and then move back to 75 yards. All right, 40 yards from the target, kind of our dick and drill distance. So let's see how these will do from 40 yards. So here's our 4-inch barrel. So some of those did hit a little bit higher than my point of aim, but not bad overall. And they actually hit pretty hard from that distance. So our 2-inch barrel, see how this thing does. That wasn't even close. It's hanging up again. Yeah, I don't know why these particular rounds are causing that. Doesn't look like the primers are backed out or anything. Just something weird going on with that. Those hit fine, but you know, for some reason, and they weren't, you know, they weren't creeping out or something. So I don't know, you know, what's going on. The primers are not backed out from what I can tell. I'm just not really seeing any particular reason for that. It rotates fine when there's nothing in the gun, so yeah, I don't know what's causing that, to be honest. So let me back it up to 75 yards now. All right, 75 yards from the target just for fun. So let's see how I can do with our 4-inch barrel here. How well these things will shoot for me. A couple more for this 4-inch barrel. Alright, so those shoot really good on the 4-inch barrel. And they hit with some pretty good authority at that distance. So 2-inch barrel, and it's weird because these things will rotate fine when they're not fired. So I'm rotating that. No problem. So it's just almost like once I fire, there's a problem, but I don't know what it is. So, see how I do with our 2-inch barrel. Yep. I can't really identify that problem. Primer's not backed out. Extractor's not backed out. There's no bullets that are coming through the front of the cylinder, so no clue. That's definitely me on the last shot pulling it. I did automatically aim below the target with these, thinking that they were going to shift up. So yeah, I don't know what's, you know, after they're fired, they're fine. Couldn't tell you why that did that. Interesting. So looking at this overall, you know, even though we started this video and I was really concerned about the way they were going through the paper target at 5 yards, it didn't really seem to play out to be a problem in our terminal ballistics. And honestly, all of these performed relatively acceptably. Looking at how they performed through the 4-inch barrel, I would say this is absolutely fantastic overall. So I'm going to give you the overall opinion here. A lot of people will tell you, you know, look what happened in my gel block, and they won't explain anything else. Like, it was hard to shoot, there was too smoky, you know, I couldn't get it back down on target, etc., etc. I like to do the whole gamut of things here. So, but overall, I'm going to say for a 4-inch barrel, absolutely fantastic. Not really seeing a whole lot of leading going on. So not too dirty as far as leading. It's mostly soot from the powder. So to the 4-inch barrel, a very capable load, and we had really good performance in our real world simulation. We actually had, looks like, better performance with that bullet, which tells you a lot. It tells you that in a real world situation, going through bones, fabric, or whatnot, this bullet is kind of barrier blind when it comes to fabric. So, you know, it's going to flatten against basically ribs and still expand really well. And these are very capable loads in a 4-inch barrel. If you didn't know, back in the 1986 FBI shootout, everybody knows about that, you know, how 38 Special sucks, and that's kind of what people say. And it's actually the 9mm failed, and Ed Morales pulled out his 4-inch barrel Smith & Wesson 686 loaded with a 158 grain lead hollow point FBI load, and through a 4-inch barrel he stopped that threat with one hand, you know, shooting into a car. So it's a very capable load in this setup here. So, you know, it's kind of like a light 357 Magnum, but it's only a 38 Special, and this would be totally safe to fire in a 38 Special only revolver, like a Model 64 or Model 10 or whatever. So very capable load. And when we look at the 2-inch barrel, I mean, this is not for me personally. It performed pretty good. We had some pretty good expansion, you know, in our ballistic gel test. The one round kind of over penetrated, but I'm not going to call that as over penetrating because, you know, it stopped against our back rib simulation. But, you know, for the amount of muzzle rise, I didn't like it. I mean, the actual recoil in your hand was a lot less than a 357 Magnum, so it's not uncomfortable to shoot with the actual recoil, but the muzzle kind of flips up. It's kind of like shooting a 45 auto or something like that through a kind of a small pistol, where it doesn't really beat up your hand, but that muzzle just wants to jump up. So I didn't really like that. I personally would want to have a lighter bullet for a snub nose, but that being said, it works fine. So if you're into that thing for, you know, a snub nose gun, work totally fine. I just don't like it. But when it comes to the 4-inch barrel, I like that in this. It shot pretty good. So I'm actually surprised because these did perform better than the Hornady bullet or the Zero brand bullets. You know, 95% of the time when people on my channel say, no, you need to try this one, what happens is I'll try what they're saying is going to be the better option, and then it's just as bad as everything else, and then they're like, weird, what'd you do wrong? It's like, but this actually played out to, you know, people said that it was better, and it looks to me like it's better. So definitely a better FBI load. This is the FBI load now that I'm going to say is probably the better load to go with here with using that particular bullet. So again, thank you to Hillbilly Scholar for sending these bullets over to the channel for testing. I had a lot of fun doing this, and they loaded really nice too. Most bullets, when you're trying to do these particular loads, they're just off a little bit. When you go to seat them, they just feel like they're kind of kiltered, and sometimes you see shaving lead coming off, whatnot, and then the overall length for the load data doesn't line up to your crimp line. These things were perfect. Speer's data showed, you know, 1.455. I seated them all, very little pressure to seat them, so they're all consistently right. And then the crimp line lines exactly up with the case mouth, and you're done. So it's good to go on that account. So really like these. So again, thank you to Hillbilly Scholar, and thanks for watching, guys. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.